Of all the former MLB players not in the Hall of Fame, Bill Buckner is one of the most well-known. There's a pretty good chance that if you're watching this video, you've heard of Bill Buckner before, and you probably know him for this 10 seconds of his career.
Little roller up along first, behind the bag, it gets through Buckner, here comes Knight and the Mets win it!
Having committed probably the most famous error in baseball history, overshadowed what was otherwise a really good career. Before the error even happened, Buckner had already won a batting title, gone to an All-Star game, and received MVP votes in 5 different seasons, all while suffering through chronic ankle injuries. Over the 1970s and 80s, the only player who recorded more hits than Bill Buckner was Pete Rose. One former teammate compared his hustle to Pete Rose and his bat control to Tony Gwynn. Bill Buckner was a gamer and would be remembered fondly for it forever, if not for one fateful play. Most of the beginning of a young Bill Buckner's story takes place in California. Buckner was born in California and went to Napa High School in California. He was choosing between Stanford and USC for college and was drafted by the LA Dodgers with the 25th overall pick in the 1968 draft. That draft pick was enough to get Buckner to go pro out of high school. Just a year later, the young left fielder got called up to the major leagues. His cup of coffee as a 19-year-old was pretty brief. He made one at-bat as a pinch hitter in the big leagues, popped out to second base, and that was it. Having had a good season in the minor leagues though, there was talk of Buckner being the Dodgers' starting left fielder in 1970. It's worth noting here that the man who would later become known for his error at first base actually got his big league start as a left fielder, and not a bad one. As the Society for American Baseball Research puts it, until his ankle injury later in his career, Buckner was a speedy outfielder who was capable of making outstanding catches. Buckner himself seemed pretty confident heading into the 1970 season. He thought that he could be a 300 hitter in the big leagues and that he was a better hitter than some of the guys already on the team. Those two things did end up being pretty much true over the course of Buckner's career, and in 1970 he was the starter in left field, although he struggled. For that season, he hit just 191. Still, he was making progress year by year. Buckner had played in 1 game in 1969, 28 in 70, and then 108 in 1971. In addition to finally crossing the 100 game mark, Buckner also hit his first 5 career home runs. Because he was having better years every season at this point though, 1972 was even better for Bill Buckner than 1971. In a similar number of games, Buckner improved his average on base and slugging by over 40 points each and his OPS plus by 22. The next step was to do that in more than 105 games, and that one came in 1974. 74 was the first season where Bill Buckner was able to marry the higher end of his production with the higher end of his games played. He'd had a season of playing 140 games, and he'd had a season of putting up good offensive numbers, but this season he was able to do both. Buckner hit for a 314 average, a 351 on base, and matched his previous career high with a 117 OPS plus. Buckner was still pretty low in his counting numbers, as his home runs, RBIs, and walks were still all pretty low, but he made up for that with his sheer contact hitting. In a season where he only walked 30 times, Buckner struck out even less than that. In addition to that, he also stole 31 bases. Buckner did that all as the starting left fielder of a Dodger team that won 102 games. That team then beat the Pirates in the NLCS to move on and face the Dynasty A's in the World Series. This series did not go well for the Dodgers, who went down in 5 games. What it did feature was Bill Buckner's only career postseason home run to chase Catfish Hunter from the 8th inning of Game 3. Buckner's 1975 was more like 73 than 74. He put up a down year at the plate and only played in 92 games while suffering through an ankle injury that would nag him for the rest of his career and eventually force him to move to first base. 76 then was more like 74, just not quite as good, and would ultimately mark the end of Buckner's time in LA. He was traded to the Cubs in a deal that sent Buckner and Ivan DeJesus to Chicago in exchange for Mike Garman and Rick Monday. Monday. Bill Buckner was heading to play in the friendly confines, and the benefits of hitting at Wrigley Field were certainly seen. On no day was this more apparent than on May 17th, 1979. That afternoon, in a game that the Cubs lost 23-22, Buckner drove in 7 of those 22 Cubs runs on 4 hits. His time in Chicago, and specifically the 80s, was really when Buckner hit his prime. Buckner started off the 80s with a bang. As a 30-year-old with the Cubs, Buckner set his career high in batting average and won a batting title. He recorded the 4th most hits in the NL, and his 41 doubles was 2nd most in the NL. He moved back out to left field when the Cubs picked up a first baseman at the deadline, bad ankle and all, and immediately went on a 10-game hitting streak. For his performance, Buckner ended up finishing 14th in NL MVP voting. In terms of accolades, Buckner's 1981 was even better than 80. He moved up from 14th to 10th in MVP voting and made his first and only All-Star appearance. The All-Star version of Buckner led the NL in doubles with 35. That year, he finished 5th in average, 11th in OBP, and 6th in slugging in the NL. He was the lone bright spot on a Cubs team that was otherwise off. They finished just 38-65, last in the NL East, last in the NL, and second last in the entire major leagues. The next season for Chicago was at least somewhat of an improvement. As the team improved slightly, Buckner put up another similar year at the plate and again finished 10th in MVP voting. The next season was similar for the Cubs and Buckner, who again returned to the league lead in doubles. He was getting older though, and with their aging star on the wrong side of 30, the Cubs traded Buckner during the summer of '84. He was shipped to the Red Sox in a deal that got back 2 players, namely a future Hall of Famer in Dennis Eckersley. At his farewell news conference, the fan favorite Buckner shed some tears about leaving Chicago. It was a tough moment for both parties, one that led into the final chapter of Bill Buckner's career. Buckner's first full season in a Red Sox uniform was another year of him putting up a good year at the plate and the team as a whole putting up a forgettable year. That changed in '86 though, as the '86 Red Sox were the class of the American League. Buckner himself had a bit of a down year at the plate as he suffered through bone spurs in his bad ankle, but turned it on down the stretch to lead Boston into the playoffs with a scorching last month. His role in the Sox ALCS win over the Angels was a little less, as Buckner hit just .214 in the series, but either way, the Red Sox were going to the World Series. Before the series, Buckner did an interview with WBZ-TV that would later ring all too true.
The dreams are that you're going to have a great series and win, and the nightmares are that you're going to let the winning run score on a ground ball through your legs, so, you know.
Fast forward to Game 6, when a Dave Henderson home run and Marty Barrett single in the 10th inning gave the Red Sox a 5-3 lead. Just 3 outs away from finally breaking the curse of the Bambino, Red Sox manager John McNamara made a decision that would haunt this Red Sox team forever. Throughout the entire postseason, whenever the Red Sox had a lead in the 9th inning, McNamara would take out Buckner and his bad ankle in favor of a defensive replacement. Every single Red Sox win in the postseason so far had ended with Dave Stapleton at first base, not Bill Buckner. The last Red Sox win that Buckner had finished was almost a month before Game 6. In later years, McNamara would deny reports that he kept Buckner in because he wanted him to be on the field when the Red Sox won the World Series. Either way, it was Buckner on the field when that lead started to unravel. 3 straight Mets singles drove in a run and chased Calvin Schiraldi from the game. With Bob Stanley in and nursing a 1-run lead, he wild pitched in the tying run. On the 3-2 count, on the 10th pitch of the at-bat, Mookie Wilson hit a little roller up along first.
Little roller up along first, behind the bag, it gets through Buckner, here comes Knight and the Mets win it!
The The English word scapegoat is one that comes up somewhat frequently in American culture. At its core, the term originates from a sacrifice done for the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur. In its more contemporary usage, though, the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines it as one that bears the blame for others, or one that is the object of irrational hostility. Bill Buckner committed what is the most infamous error in the history of the sport. What the error was the error that allowed the winning run to score. What it was not was the one that allowed the tying run to score. That was on Bob Stanley's wild pitch. What it was not was the error that choked away the series. That came in Game 7 when the Red Sox blew yet another multi-run lead. For his part, Buckner had 2 hits and a run in Game 7. Bill Buckner committed a terrible error that ultimately did play a large role in the Red Sox losing the World Series, but at its core, he was a scapegoat. He took on a large, somewhat irrational portion of the blame for a situation that was partly but far from entirely his fault. The consequence of this was that a good MLB career was forgotten and replaced with an error. Bill Buckner would play 4 more Twilight years before retiring to end his 22-year MLB career. On its own, having played 22 years is the mark of a really good career, but we can't talk about Buckner's story without talking about the hit number. Over the 2 decades from 1970 to 1989, pretty much Buckner's entire career, the only player who recorded more hits than Buckner was Pete Rose. In that group with Buckner, you have Rose, who's the all-time hit king, 2 Hall of Famers, and Al Oliver, who's a 7-time All-Star. He put up good numbers, and from what people said about him later, he was pretty well respected too. After Buckner's death, former teammate Rick Sutcliffe in particular had some strong praise. He said, "You think of the hustle of Pete Rose, the back control of Tony Gwynn, who never struck out." He then talked about the work Buckner had to do to play through those ankle injuries that he played through for a decade and a half. At the end of the day, Bill Buckner was a good player and a great scapegoat. He was the player Steve Bartman. He was the symbolic moment of a team's decades of futility. As a sports fan, I live for the moments, and the moments are great. Love the moments, but love the rest of the careers too.